Bienvenido, gracias por estar aquí. Thank you for coming and being here with us. Today is our second day of Raíces Latinas week, and we're going to be talking about queering the Latino family. So before we start, just one announcement. I wanted to remind you, if you weren't here yesterday, throughout the week we're recollecting money and fundraising for 4 different causes. One is the Raíces Latinas Scholarship. The other one is for Presbyterian Church in Cuba, who is trying to give scholarship funds for certain students for them to be able to take exams and get into universities, just as we do here. And the other one's for a church in Peru, an evangelical church. This lady works with this community in Peru, and it's trying to set up a comedor, a lunchroom for the community, and we want to help with that. And our other cause is water justice, and it's for this terrific guy that every Saturday goes to the Arizona deserts and leaves water for the people crossing the border. So with anything that you can give, 20 cents, 1 cent, $1, $100, whatever, you know, it's in your heart to give. It's laying out there so you can give, and it's going to be on behalf of the school, on behalf of all of us. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with Liliana de Jesus. She's going to be our moderator for tonight, and we hope that you enjoy it. And buen provecho.
Hello, and thank you all for coming. So I'm going to start off by introducing our speaker, the Reverend Dr. Ignacio Castuera, and Xochitl Alviso will be responding to some of his comments, and then we'll open it up for some questions. The Reverend Dr. Ignacio Castuera is a United Methodist minister with degrees from Compton College and California State University, and a Doctor of Religion from Claremont School of Theology, where he studied and wrote about the problems of violence and the patriarchal worship of a mother goddess in Mexican culture. After completing his education, Dr. Castuera served at churches in Mexico, as well as in Hawaii and California. He's worked his entire life addressing sexuality issues from his position as a church pastor. In 1980, he became the first Latino district superintendent of the LA district in the California Pacific Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church, and has participated in ecumenical and interfaith organizations throughout his ministry, and is an accomplished preacher and author. In 1992, he edited Dreams on Fire, Embers of Hope, a collection of sermons preached in LA after that year's riots. So look it up if you don't know what that's about. The book was one of the top 10 religious books of that year. And beyond his professional duties, he's a proud father of 3 daughters and 1 son, and loves to read, sing, and play tennis. So I leave you with Reverend Dr. Ignacio Castuera. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I just want you to know I'm taking very seriously the familia or family part of the conversation here. And by that I mean, if the wafting smells that are coming even to me get to you and you feel like you need to get up and get a little extra tostada or whatever, you can feel free. Estamos en casa, estamos en familia. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. It's for me, in some ways, it's a culmination of a career that has been very much interwoven with the difficult events of my lifetime, one of which was the appearance of AIDS on the scene, and AIDS was the big force that came to push a lot of closet doors, and especially in the Latino community, that was a major shocker. And I was it was in mid-career, my ministry, that happened. You've heard that I was a district superintendent in the Methodist Church in the Los Angeles district, where we have a significant gay community and also significantly closeted community. And here I was there as a district superintendent, and AIDS burst into the scene, and suddenly the real macho, handsome Rock Hudson is a quote bisexual person, and many others, come up out of their closets, forced out by this terrible pandemic. And I was one of the very first religious leaders in the Los Angeles area to insist against the horrible voices that were coming from the religious right that this disease was a human disease. It was not a gay disease, it was a human disease, and it had to be dealt with scientifically and medically, and not with the kind of judgment that many of my, quote, peers, unquote, were hurling at people and saying this is a punishment, blah, blah, blah. I was fortunately well equipped to make the kinds of statements that I was making as a district superintendent many times on television, because I was loud enough, and as a superintendent, and being not exactly a lonely voice, but a different voice from the religious voices that were filling the waves at the time. I was interviewed quite often because I was one of the few that had a different perspective from the others. So I just, I was glad that I had been equipped adequately to respond theologically, to respond as a Christian, to respond with compassion, first of all with compassion, but also then equipped by the kind of theology that the School of Theology at Claremont provided me with. Other than Boston, of course, the School of Theology at Claremont would be number one. I actually lived surrounded by Boston alumni. In fact, there was a joke in our conference about the Boston Mafia. Many of the leaders of my conference were educated here, and I'm glad that they were educated here because they were getting pretty good theological education as well. I think Brightman's personalism, put a major imprint in Methodism, and I wish we could have today in our pulpits the kind of theological depth that those alums from Boston brought to Claremont. But in 1964, 65, 66, and all that, Claremont began pointing us in a slightly different direction, and that is in the direction of process thought. John Cobb, who was Dean Moore's professor, began pointing at something extremely important, that is that the ideas that we had about God were going to be not as capable of responding to the things that we were facing at the time. We were facing the Vietnam War, we were facing the civil rights issues, and at that time only the glimmer of the possibility of the gay issues also coming forth. One of my fellow students, Ed Hansen, influenced by Cobb also, went to work at Glide Foundation, and I am extremely proud of the Methodist Church and the way in which it responded very positively from the very beginning. I think if you go out into the street and talk about, the great role that the church has played in relationship to the gay movement, people will go, "What? You're crazy!" Because in the last 40 years, the loud voices of the religious right have dominated the discussion. But in fact, we were out there, and Ed Hansen went to Glide, and Glide founded the Council on Religion and the Homophile. Before The Lord is My Shepherd and He Knows I'm Gay appeared in print, Ed Hansen was working with gay people because his brother was gay, because his brother's lover committed suicide because of the horrible things that we do to gay and lesbian people in this society. So here I had someone influenced by process thought that was saying, the kinds of ideas I'm getting from process thought lead me to do this. And one of the things, I don't want to do a lecture on process thought, but I just want to tell you that part of the reason I immediately found that this is the theology that I want, this is the theology that I need. It resonated with the theology of my family. You talk about the family. I grew up as a Roman Catholic with an almighty God, an omnipotent God. And however, at home there was no omnipotent God. There was an almost omnipotent mother who, after a beating, would say, "Palo dado ni Dios lo quita." She would say, a good beating, not even God can take it away. So where's this omnipotent God? So that was the first dent That was the first dent on the doctrine of the omnipotence of God, and it stayed with me. And so when John Cobb starts talking about God, you know, acting in different ways in the world, being one of the many forces at any given moment, and hopefully those of us who really pay attention to God will make that power of God more real in life, because we're responding and we're conforming ourselves to that. And wow, this is the way my mom meant it, you know, this is the way, you know, we really should be acting. The other thing that my mother taught me as a kid, she finished her schooling at 3rd grade, but she was a very educated woman in many other ways. And she did not have this name. I didn't have this name until much later, but she was a situational ethicist. She would say to us, en la calle como reyes, en la iglesia como santos, en su casa como locos. So there you go, you know. So when I then came to process thought and in terms of ethical issues, that you don't have this huge rules that apply forever and ever, but that you really negotiate according to the moment in which you find yourself in and all that, you know, this, and that God is acting with you in that. And so that really made a lot of sense. And that made it possible for me then, as I went from one context to another in my ministry, to say, yes, I need to go out there and protest at the entrance of the Marine Air Corps base in Kaneohe, Hawaii, right? And talk about peace, talk about a God of peace and all. So when the AIDS pandemic hit, I was prepared, I was ready. And to bring now specifically to the issue of family, the one thing that I found more often than not is that the Latino families, shocked though they were, I did not encounter one single parent, one single mother, one single brother that said, he's not my brother anymore. Now that I know that he's gay, yuck, you know, I'll never have anything to do with it. The first pastoral visit that I had, because the parish, you know, the wonderful thing about Wesley talking about the fact that we're not limited to the walls of the church, but the parish I chose after the superintendency was the Hollywood Church, and I'm glad that Bishop Toole, may he rest in peace, agreed with me that I should go to the Hollywood Church, and from there I was able then to minister to those affected and infected by AIDS. And the very first Latino that I met was a burly Marine guy, you know, retired Marine guy that was crying over the illness of his son, never abandoning him. This strong Texan guy, never abandoning him. So the question I began asking myself at that point is, why don't we do it earlier? Why did we have to expect until these terrible moments, you know? And why don't we empower our families to deal with this much earlier? And so I'm really happy for what has happened since then, because I really think that more and more and more Latino families and more families now, not just the Latino families, are realizing that a son or a daughter does not change at all when out of her mouth or his mouth they say, I am gay, Dad, I'm lesbian, Mom, you know, I'm transgender. Nothing changes. It's still the same little baby that you held in your hands, now a grown person, saying to you, this is what I am. These are the ways in which sexuality makes sense to me. And so the parents and the relatives need to be informed as early as possible about these situations. And as I said, the Latino families consistently did very well. As opposed to, and I'm not accusing, I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I did see many Anglo families and non-Latino families where they responded positively. But I'll never forget, we hired a man from South Carolina as the church administrator, and I can say his name because he's completely out. Rodney Sprott came And he studied law. His father wanted him to study law, and he wanted to be a tough lawyer. He could not be a tough lawyer. He was a wonderful person that could not be a tough lawyer, and he was much more at home administering a church, dealing with all of the problems of church administration. And so when we interviewed him, we hired him. We never asked anything about sexual orientation or anything, but he felt really at home because the Hollywood church was on the verge of becoming a reconciling congregation. We did eventually become a reconciling congregation. When Rodney brought his parents to tell them to come out, we provided a weekend of wining and dining for them, introducing the family to several of Rodney's gay friends, many of whom sang in our church choir and all kinds of things. When he told the family, when he told the father and mother that he was gay, the mother stood up and said to the husband, "We're leaving right now." And they moved to a hotel close to the airport. Now, I can tell you that, thank God, the family has come around. And before they died, they were able to acknowledge that. The grandmother, interestingly enough, she says, "I've known you've been gay for a long, long time. What's wrong with my daughter? I didn't bring her up that way." So, we have to give more tools to our families for them to be able to deal with these issues. I'm very happy that in the Latino world now we have the work of De La Torre, the professor of ethics at Miguel Ángel de la Torre, who has written two excellent books that deal with sexuality, one with general sexuality and one specifically on homosexuality. And in both of those books, he appeals to the issue of family, that we really need to be part of the family, and that in the case of heterosexual relations outside of, quote, marriage, that they can be familial relationships, right? I mean, some of you are nodding as you have read the book probably, and if you haven't read it, get it. It's a wonderful, wonderful book that I wish I had when I was much younger. It would have avoided all kinds of problems for me if I had that book earlier in my life. So I'm glad and proud, again, of Methodist De La Torres at ILIF, even though he's technically Southern Baptist. He was ordained in some Southern Baptist congregation. You know how that goes, and he just owns that and just puts that. So the Southern Baptists go, "Wow, how the heck is that?" But Miguel Ángel is a fantastic guy. And the other book that he wrote, specifically dealing with issues of homosexuality, is La Familia, which is a book that I started. And I just ran out of time, and I had too many other interests. And also, when his book came out, I said, "Why do I need to write another book?" So he needs to, and he completed that. And so I don't even remember whether he mentions that in the book or not. But I actually started that family, and I did a not just translation, but a transculturation that. Of a pamphlet that was written originally in English, and it was addressed to families. Because really, that's the bottom line. That's where we really need to get our best messages. They need to be in our homes. And this is the thing that really sensitized me very early to this. The sad reality that a young teenage man or woman who is struggling with sexuality has to put up with jokes around the dinner table and doesn't have yet the tools with which to say, "Hey, you're talking about me," or "I'm wondering about what's going to happen with my own sexuality when it gets finally well defined." We don't have that, I mean, if somebody called me a bad name or a black person a bad name, you could go home and you could be embraced by your parent. But if somebody calls somebody a bad name because they suspect that he is gay, usually with a man, can he go and say to Dad, somebody called me this? The father would just go crazy. And the kid feels that he cannot share that. I mean, it's a lonely kind of a thing. And it just go, wow. It's bad to make comparisons of the kinds of suffering that we have, but to me, that is a significant difference of the kind of suffering that young women and men that are struggling with their own sexuality have as different from being a young black kid, a young Chicano kid, a young Asian kid. You know, they do not have, they cannot know for sure that they're going to have the support of their families. And so for me, I mean, that was a no-brainer. Always, you know, I have always tried to be in ministry with them. One final point, and that is, I want to make sure that we understand family in another way. I love my family, I love my family, but I love my family. I want us to understand family in the way Jesus understood family. He was not limited to his ethnic group. He was not limited to his nuclear family group. Remember that difficult text? Mom and your dad are here. You remember your brothers and sisters are here. And who's my mother? Who's my brother? Who's my sister? I think this is something that we need to do. And I know that we need a balance in that, because in the case of Latinos and blacks primarily, who have been living in a situation where the rest of society does not appreciate them, they need to get their value and say, so we're going to be Afrocentric. Maulana Karenga is a very good personal friend, and I understand his Afrocentrism. But I think it's limited. I understood and participated in the call for Aslan, you know, but I understand its limits. Because that's only part of the whole family. Every time that I would say Aslan, or if I were Maulana and would say Afrocentrism, and then I have to pray, our Father who art in heaven, or our Abba, or our mother, you know, which I do now these days. So the family is this family. It's a bigger family. And so I think there is a parallel here. I just go back very quickly to process theology. John Cobb has been engaged in interfaith dialogue, primarily with Buddhists. But he has written about Christocentric pluralism. And that means that it's more than just saying, gee, I love all religions, you know, it's okay, I mean, I can... No, I am profoundly centered in Christ. But it is precisely because of that centeredness in Christ that I understand why somebody else has other centered. And we can participate in all kinds of activities of mutual enrichment or of enrichment of others if we participate out of that. Well, I think extrapolating from John's position, I think I can say to Maulana, yes, be Afrocentric, but in such a way that your Afrocentrism opens you up to my Mexicocentrism. Because I'm more Mexico-centric than Latino-centric, quite frankly. I mean, I love Argentinians too, but it is out of my Mexicocentrism that I love the Ches and the Boricuas. So, and it's the same, right? I mean, it's the same as we talk about the family. So I want to just refer to one example, because I think African Americans are leading us now in a direction that the rest of us, I think in the case of whites, they don't need that as much, because great examples of white, gay, and lesbian persons are out there. But we do not have many good examples of Latino, gay, and lesbian persons. And we need that. We need that. And I think that the example that is now emerging in the black community is the recovery of history in terms of this man who was so central to the civil rights movement that almost disappeared from history because of his homosexuality. And I have to apologize, I do not know how to pronounce his first name. It's Bayard Rustin. And Bayard Rustin, quite frankly, I mean, I thought I knew the movement. You know, I was in seminary. By the way, many of my professors were being arrested during the Vietnam War and were marching in the civil rights movements and all of that. I had not heard about him until just recently. And there's a wonderful article written by somebody in England about him, the man whose homosexuality almost was erased him from history. The homophobia has almost erased many, many people from history, and the same thing will happen in the case of Latinos. And I want to tell you that the movement of Chavez and the farm workers was filled at the top level with people who are, some of them are still alive, gay or lesbian. I want to bring up one person in particular whom I knew personally, and who even today, as you read his very tiny biography in Wikipedia, it doesn't say anything about the fact that he was gay. They say he died of AIDS, but they don't say he was gay. And Carlos Almaraz, that's a name I commend to your attention and to your study. Was a great painter and writer and philosopher. He wrote more than 50 books. Again, who knew, right? And Carlos used to be at Delano a lot of times. And the only article that I ever remember that mentioned the relationship between the workers' movement, the farm workers' movement, and the gay community appeared in a publication of Los Angeles Free Press, it's called, and it referred to a group of lesbians and gays that was among the very first ones that showed up at Delano to come over and help Cesar with the movement. But we don't want to go there. We don't want to. I mean, here it is. There's this man just, they talk about his wonderful paintings and all of that, and the only reference to he died of AIDS, it says that Almaraz went on to work for famed Arizona and fellow Chicano Cesar Chavez, painting murals, banners, and other types of paintings for Chavez United Farm Works. He also painted for Luis Valdez Teatro Campesino. That's the only relationship that is given, or any. They were more than that. They were really very close, and they were part of a cadre of people that were always thinking about what do we do next. And the other person who was there also was Father Luis Olivares. Luis Olivares was pastor of the La Placita Church. He also died of AIDS. The official explanation for his AIDS given by the office, the very same office that lied about the priests molesting children, that explanation was that Father Olivares had caught AIDS because he probably used a contaminated needle in one of his many trips to El Salvador. Luis Olivares never said what the archdiocese said is true. He never said that. He just let them say that their own piece. But those of us who were close to Cesar and to Carlos and to Luis knew exactly what the truth was. And we need to have those things out. I am not out to AIDS took the door out of the closets of many leaders. I'm not out to take the tombstones out of anybody's grave. But I think we really need to just say, we need really good examples so that young Latinos and Latinas, they can point out in the same way that now blacks can point to Bayard and say, look, we have been part of this history. We must be part of this history. Thank you.
And responding will be Xochitl Alviso. Most of you already know Xochitl. She's a queer feminist Mexican-American who often finds herself on the boundary of many different worlds. She's a PhD candidate in practical theology here at BU with a focus on feminist theology, ecclesiology, and the emerging church. Co-founder of the Pub Church Boston, and also has a chapter in the forthcoming anthology Feminism and Religion in the 21st Century titled Being Undone by the Other, Feminisms, Blogs, and Critiques, so keep an eye out for that as well.
This is my first time presenting in a way of responding to someone that I just heard. Thank you so much. I resonated with tons of what you said. I take like crazy, like exactly notes and try to figure out what to put together. I think one of the things that really struck me about what you said was the issue of who we look to. You know what I mean? Like, who are our models? You know, who serves? Because it's kind of a question of like who serves to help us feel normal, really. You know what I mean? Because we have a culture and a society that institutionalizes certain things as normal. And we don't, you know, a lot of people get to recognize themselves in that, but then those who don't are left with a feeling of, you know, marginalization, of invisibility. So I think that's probably been a growing part of my own reflection in terms of what do people get to know about me, you know what I mean? And then what don't they get to know about me, and how does that help either to continue to have things function, you know, in these heterosexist norms, or trouble those. So trying to pay attention to that, I think is really important, and it's a growing kind of area for me. I grew up in a family that normalized a lot of things for me. You know what I mean? They normalized kind of an expansive understanding of you know, familia, an expansive understanding of who's part of our household. There were few times in my life growing up where we didn't have more people living with us than just my family and my siblings. We had always had a lot of people living with us, different people. And you know, as I got older, I learned really it was part of the experience my parents had. You know, I mean, my parents came to the U.S. My dad was 18 years old, and my mom was in Mexico pregnant with me, and she was 16 years old. And my dad came and to the U.S. first to find work, you know, and then he would save up and then send for my mom. And so here he was, an 18-year-old in a new country, looking for work, and I don't know how he ended up in this shop where they told him there was work available. He just had to wait for the foreman, and he wasn't in yet, but I'm sure he'd be in any minute and stuff. So my dad stuck around, you know, waiting in the shop all day and stuff, and lunchtime came, and then the rest of the work day, and then the foreman never showed up, and they said, well, you know, maybe try again tomorrow. So my dad showed up the next day, the next morning, and he was there. And by this time, it's the second day of my dad hanging out outside the shop, you know, in that like parking lot area. And someone asked him, one of the employees there asked him, like, oh, so who are you? And you know, my dad's like, oh, I'm looking for a job, you know, and they got to chatting and waiting for the foreman and stuff. He's like, oh, okay. And then this man, Duke shared his lunch with my dad, and, you know, they're like, well, good luck, you know. And everyone went back to work. At the end of the day, for whatever reason, the foreman had not shown up at the shop for 2 days. So at the end of that day, that man, Duke, said, so, you know, he didn't show up, you know, what happened? And then he's like, so where are you staying? And my dad's just like, you know, I'm, you know, not sure, you know, I'll just stay somewhere. And I think he was sleeping in a park or something. And Duke is like, wow, no, come stay at our house, you know. And that man is still, he's my godfather now. my godfather, Duke Duplessis. And he took my dad in, and my dad got a job at that shop, worked there for a while, saved up. Then my mom came from Mexico, and they lived with them until they saved up enough to get their apartment. And he, you know, before I was even born, my godfather said, you know, can I baptize your baby, you know, and be the godfather and stuff. And so he chose us, basically, like my godfather chose my family before I was even born. And, but like that's the experience that my parents had, right? So that created a new norm, right, of their experience and stuff. So we institutionalize certain things about what counts, you know, as family, what counts as, you know, sexuality, you know, whose sexuality counts and stuff. But just as easy, just as difficult, and so queering the family, I think, can be just as easy as it can be difficult, or just as difficult as it can be easy. You mean, like, we really can use our practices and our way of living for either way, you know what I mean? for whatever reason, I never know what I'm going to say until I start saying it right now. So I feel
There have been
inspired.
precedents in history.
Oh, good? Okay, good. That's good. So another, because, I'm thinking about the Latino family. And so I grew up in a family where I had my Tío Tony, was my Tío Tony. Apparently I grew up with him, and he and my mom were just 2 years apart. And my mom and him had gone to like catechism classes together and everything. But when I was about, and apparently I have very limited memories from my childhood, of that memory. But so I remember my Tío Tony from when I was around 10 or 11 years old. But apparently he was always at our house, and he used to like, I was a little baby, and he would play with me all the time and stuff. And he was really close with my mom and obviously my dad too and stuff. And my Tío Tony, one time we were all in my aunt and uncle's houses, all the families, all the cousins and everything, we were all together. And we were very excited, me and my sister, because my Tío Tony and my Tía Leti, we saw their car arriving. And so we're like, oh, my Tío Tony's here, da da da. And then my older cousins are like, that's not your Tío Tony, that's your Tía Sofía. And I was just like, that's my Tío Tony. And they're like, no, that's your Tía Sofía. So then I go and ask my mom, and I was like, Mom, Art and Patty are saying, I'm supposed to call my Tío Tony Tía Sofía. And this Tío and Tía are aunt and uncle, if anybody doesn't know. Sorry. And so my mom's like, that's okay, but that's your Uncle Tony. I was like, well, why did he tell me to call my Uncle Tía Sofía? And they're like, well, he used to be a girl, but he's a boy now. That's your Uncle Tony. And I was like, oh, okay. And like, it was just that simple. I was like, but obviously, like in my family, my parents made it that simple for me. Like they made it that way. Like they created that, understanding, that definition, of family and how to understand sexuality or gender or sex. They just made it. But, my Uncle Tony's parents and siblings made it difficult in their family. And so my aunts and uncles, from that side of the family, taught my cousins to not recognize Tony for who he was, and to refuse to see him fully. So like in terms of like how, who we recognize as family, like who do we include, and we don't want just family that we expect, to be a certain way, but to like, how do we expand that? So I just think about like, what are our resources, right? Like how do we equip, or what are the tools? And so one of them, I think, is the stories. To just tell the stories of the realities. Like the realities were queer, like in so many ways. Like there are so many ways in which Latino families and any family don't fit any kind of package norm or these like fixed categories. Yeah. And there's more academic resources too. Like in terms of being a pastor or a leader, religious or otherwise, for me, queer theology has been a great resource. Because queer theology starts from the starting point of not taking sexuality as something that's kind of fixed, universal, determined for all times, but understands that that's constructed. That we've created these boxes that then we like expect everyone to fit within. And so like to queer is to reclaim the reality of all of those differences already being human, already being part of us. And then queer theology then draws from that and thinks about how our understanding of what it means to be church or the household of God or the body of Christ is not just one thing, it doesn't just look one way. So in terms of resources, I think about what are the things that we have to share. And I think one of the things I'm growing in is realizing that for those of us who can and feel comfortable telling our stories and talking about the queerness of our families, of ourselves and stuff, that we need to do that. Like not everyone can because of a lot of different circumstances and because it's, there's a lot of things at stake, sometimes financial, sometimes in terms of safety. But for those of us who can and do have it within us, we need to. I mean, I think as people who are in positions that get platforms, that get listened to, that will write and be parts of communities and stuff. So part of my story is that I'm married to a man. We just celebrated last week 15 years of being married, and actually our friend who officiated our wedding is here. He was present, Brian Stone. He was one of the 2 people that officiated, and he always joked that he said he helped bring us together, so he's invested in like having us be successful and flourish. And so the way that we have flourished has now looked the traditional way, because about 7 years into our marriage, I ended up discovering that, oh, I'm actually lesbian. That's why this sex thing didn't work for me for so long. I was like, I wasn't broken, I'm just not hetero. And for a while, like when I kind of came to realize that it was, obviously it was a difficult process of like, well, what does that mean for our family? You know what I mean? Like, what does that mean for my relationship with Jesse? Like, we really like and care for each other, and we love each other, But when I called my dad to tell him, after I had told Jesse, Jesse and I basically had like 2 weeks of walking around like zombies, but then we decided, like not knowing what to do or what this means and stuff. But then decided it was my last semester of my master's program, so we decided, well, let's not make any decisions right now. Let's just see, let's finish this. We came here for school. Let's have you finish school, and then we'll figure out what we'll do. We'll make decisions then. But I called my dad and I called my parents to tell them and stuff. And so I was like, Dad, blah, 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 I'm lesbian. He's like, yeah, so? And I was like, what do you mean, yes, so? Like, it's terrible. Like, what am I going to do? What does this mean for me and Jesse? Like, it's too hard. And then he's like, do you love him? And I was just like, of course I love him. He's like, does he love you? I'm like, of course he loves me. He's like, you'll figure it out. You know what I mean? And then it's just like, so I was just like, it made no sense to me, actually. When he told me that, it made no sense. Like, because there was no imagination for any other possibilities. You know what I mean? If you're a man and a woman, and then one of you figures out that you're not hetero, the only imagination we have is that you divorce, you separate. You know what I mean? Like, you go and have the relationships that, with the person of the sex and gender that, you're attracted to and stuff. So I didn't have an imagination for what it could possibly mean to work it out, But it was so clear to my dad that, you love each other, you figure it out. And so because we gave ourselves time, because I still had like 3+ semesters to finish my master's, and we had that excuse that we didn't plan for, but it served as time for basically our imagination to be open, for our understanding of what it means to be family and what it means to love one another expand. And it meant that we could stay part of each other's family, that we didn't have to separate or divorce, that he can still be the man I married because he is the man I married, and we're part of each other's family, and we share life, and we partner in so many ways, and not in others, but we're still, we're still moving forward and querying it up. That's a little bit in my response.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, on that one, because this is where churches also can be very helpful. When I was the pastor at Hollywood, we had this wonderful family, just FOB, from Iowa, and we're in Hollywood now. We live here in Hollywood, but we wanted to make sure that our children grew up in a church where there are no defined roles and things like that. They liked the fact that the pastor was Mexican, that there were lots of blacks in our congregation, and that there were a lot of gay and lesbian people. Okay, so fast forward a few years, 16-year-old girl comes out, Dad, I'm a lesbian. So it's the same family. Fast forward about another 10 years, and the father says, I've been the wrong gender all my life. So almost at the age of 60, he began taking the hormones and all of that, and they're all together. They're all together. So your father's advice was right. I mean, it's an issue of imagination and of profound respect and love for each other. And the final thing, when my daughter was 16 years old, the second oldest, her name is Ako, Erin Akiko. And you might see her artwork. If you just Google Ako and Castuera, you'll see some of her art. She said, first, you love the person, then you negotiate the sex. 16 years old, and I'm like,